Yes, the streaming will just started, so we can continue now.
Okay. Alan, continue.
Shall I continue?
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. So there was also this, the timelines question, this timeline of implementation, which says that if we are expecting some things to be achieved by 2030, should the council or should we start getting concerned right away? 2021 session. I think Professor Khan Architect Khan had talked about it from November or something. But is the way going forward? How does the regulation happen? These steps, because who is in charge of adherence to the policy?
So, I think it's a big question, but my view, it's clear the NEP is targeting 2030 as a clear first deadline. So 10 years is not really long, in my view, because some of these structural changes may take some time. So because now, because it was very quick, the way in which things are moving fast. Okay, people were expecting this NEP to roll out much later, but it really happened in July, August. Now, once certain things are set aside, then there will be legislative changes. And the way it looks moving faster, I, I think this 2030 is a realistic deadline to watch. So now, the, there are two kinds of institutions at play here, and both need to work here. One is the university level. If you're an affiliating college, if you're affiliated to some university, the university has to make some adjustments. Now, council as a body, now I'm sure, as Mr. Khan had very clearly said, they've started responding to NEP. So the second part of the prospective plan will be addressing these changes. So we'll have some indications as to how council thinks it should look at two phases. This transition phase, but from 2020 to 2030, and post 2030 phase, which will be a very good way to go about it. So the council on one end will probably respond to that, and the institutions will respond to it. But what I see is the independent universities or deemed universities or autonomous colleges have a bit of leverage here because they would be able to quickly respond to these changes compared to institutions that are affiliated to university because they are tied to the university's change. Some universities are very efficient, they would adapt faster. Some universities may take time. But it's very clear, 2030 is a clear first deadline. I think the way it's going around, I don't see that there's major hiccups on the way, but one doesn't know. But I think it's realistic for 2030.
And the council should be able to kind of start acting on it.
Yeah, Mr. Habib Khan indicated that the second part of the prospective plan will have some very specifics towards NEP.
Sure. So there's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek subsidiary question which says the COA is in the GEC, but there's no mention of AICTE. So the regulatory conflict which has reached all the way to the Supreme Court for architects. Does that now dissolve or what happens?
No, it's AICTE is also part of the council, of the General Education Council.
But for architecture?
No, it's for the engineering.
Engineering.
So see now, if the bottom, the bedrock is colleges are to themselves. Okay, so all the other institutions are providing support mechanisms. One, two, one is looking education from a professional standard point of view. Okay, so council will have far more to say about architecture profession than AICTE, I'm assuming. But nevertheless, now they're all now merged and become a member of a larger education council. Any directive that's going to come, it's going to come from a larger council than an independent body.
Fantastic. Dr. Anandakrishna, please do chip in with your own points of view on any of the questions at any time, please. Right, here are two. There are 2 points, and they're not questions per se. their suggestions to the council. But I would love your reactions, both of you, on it. This is Vishwanath Kashikar from SEP, who is saying that there distinctly needs to be multiple plans of actions for colleges. Can the Council of Architecture think of a conference and invite papers for different suggestions as to what are the plans of action that colleges can follow? And there's another suggestion from Jinu Kichli, who says, and which Kashikar kind of endorses later, which says it might also be important to predict the modes of professional practice in addition to just the contents of education, to also predict modes of professional practice, because that might have a bearing on education. And maybe the council can undertake either a study or call upon the professionals today to, because it is going to be a professional standards body very soon, implications on education. So I have voiced the points, but would you like to respond to that, Dr. Anantakrishna, Dr. Srivatsan, one after the other?
Sure. Professor
Yeah.
Anantakrishnan?
Yes. You see, the point is the first point you mentioned is about India, you say, being such a large country and if you take the architectural education, there is a definite scope for different approaches, different ideologies, and different outcomes. Okay, so that scope can be exploited or leveraged by the independence that is projected to be given to these institutions by the National Education Policy 2020. So I agree with that, and to my mind, such a large and diverse country should have differences in ideologies, and that is now possible because of the autonomy given to the individual institutions. So that is my view. So the NEP in fact facilitates that diversity in ideologies. That is my view, sir.
Yeah, it's absolutely a valid point to make, because education is just not just about itself; it's also about its relationship to profession, etc. Now, seriously, there is ongoing conversation from a different perspective about what will be the nature of profession. How about licensing exam? Can there be just an exclusive architect only practice, or a combination of engineers and architects to set up a firm? So these are debates that are happening elsewhere. But I'm sure council will now not only look NEP's impact on education, and if the NEP's agenda is to set different or a diverse practice possibility, I'm sure it will have a bearing on the practice itself. So the council is very uniquely positioned to both look at what NEP would do to education and what are the demands of the practice, and in the new case scenario, how it will all meld. So I think when Kashikar says about this multiple actions, I mean that you have to look at the both ends of the stick. If one end of the stick is academic and another end of the stick is the profession, I'm sure this conversation would certainly need to happen. That's my first point. The second point is, yes, there will be multiple strategies. It's not just only council's role. See, this kind of conversation has to happen within each universities and colleges also, because the initiatives have to come from both sides. Because the NEP spirit is more or less like that you have to promote from within yourself, within the college and the university. So not to expect only council to do most of the work, which it will, but it can't also. So some of the conversations must happen at the university and college level. So they can also make seek clarity, ask for more information, suggest ideas, etc.
Yeah, fantastic. So, there is a point that we've not yet fully realize the architecture education, the impact of online education. Most of us are still getting used to online classes, which is only the same teacher giving the same lecture on a computer instead of in front of you. But online education, which is learning at your will and as you choose, can be a very different force. Now, the policy does talk about it in the later sections. It leaves online learning and long distance learning to the institutions themselves. But the last part of the NEP talks about the task force, that can look at that the technical platform, national education technical platform. So, do you think in addition to just modes of professional practice, modes of education itself is are going to change if there is a higher education institution that is online? Is that something that we should be looking at? We are not.
My view is certainly technology will have a bearing on delivery of education, how we deliver, and also how you learn. Okay, not only in this mode of digital, like what we are doing, but even subsequently. Now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it would swing towards one leaving the other. Increasingly, there's going to be a seamless movement between the digital and the on-campus work. So institutions which can seamlessly work between these two modes are the ones who will do better. When if you swing that one way or the other, it won't work much. So what is going to happen is this experience currently that we are undergoing is certainly telling us, are we technologically ready for certain kinds of deliveries of education? Not that that's the only mode that's going to happen in future, but it's going to be an important mode. Not only in terms of what the NEP calls the ODL, open distance learning, it's also in the everyday functioning of the universities. Some universities have dovetailed it very well. Some universities are struggling. So there is going to be an important agenda in every institution going forward. How do they respond to such things? So that's absolutely necessary. Leave alone a national level framework and setup. Individually, all of them needs to address.
Sure, excellent. I think we now have the audience also back online, so I think that's a very good thing. And there are more questions coming in through. Dr. Srivatsan, if you may, a favorite issue of yours, and then probably one of mine.
Sure.
One is yours, which is quality. So you made a very evocative point about this rather flat sense of quality that exists today. And you had just begun on some of the solutions of how institutions can establish USPs, have niche offerings, and therefore be able to charge differently or provide different opportunities. There is also a question from the audience that kind of talks about should we be looking at ranking and merit and then making probably a grading of institutions, mentor and mentee relationships? Can we move to that? And that probably sets a whole new quality paradigm for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. See, I remember a conversation which was supported by council about 3 years back. So when there was a very intense conversation about introducing licensing exam for practices. Now, one of the models at the time that was in consideration was the RIBA model, part one, part two, and part three, where the part three is the license exam. Part one and part two is connected to your education. Now, there was a certain notion of gradation that was brought in, either coming out of accreditation or coming out of ranking or another model, where by graduating in certain kind of institutions which have got a certain accreditation or ranking, you will be taken as on par with part two. Okay. Most of the colleges will be equivalent to part one. But if you're coming from a certain kind of college or certain professional programs, then you will be qualified to be part two, while everyone is to be part three. So what happens is that difference in quality is also recognized. Uh, One, by this kind of arrangement of part one, part two, But I'm also thinking another way that this gradation will be acknowledged is primarily from a recruiter. Okay, today it's a flat one. So there is no premium between a good college and a bad, not so good college. Yeah. So this partly also because there is no information put out there, even for students, for instance. It's only by word of mouth. I ask somebody, I ask something. There is no way in which I would know which one is a good college over the other college in terms of what they offer, what is the outcome, what is the alumni profile, what is the placement, etc. Now, once we get into this, I'm not advocating one method over the other in terms of how to merit and rank it, but I'm assuming if we agree on something, a reasonable way to do it, then both it conveys to the potential students and the potential recruiters. And that will be confirmed both by the desire to join the college and the desire to recruit. Okay, so I think there are many ways in which this merit and ranking could operate, and it can have different kinds of recognitions and consequences. But we have to subject ourselves to that. That's the key thing.
Fantastic. That's excellent. I've been working with the ministry here, and across government, this whole thing of competitive, it's not just the federalism, but also that you compete for funds, you compete according to your ability. And so it's not top down anymore, it's merit basis coming in. Dr. Anand Krishna, would you like to respond to anything, or shall I come with another question? All right. We have Dr. Srivatsan, we have architect Kaustubh Das saying, does the NEP, is it explicit on remuneration and salaries of teachers that has been overlooked, or is the council amenable to, bringing them at par, or, you know?
No, I think NEP is not explicit, but it simply says powers would be given, or it will be the responsibility of the individual institution to come up with this whole framework of recruitment. Okay, both in terms of qualification, in terms of pay, in terms of promotion, and also in terms of increment, performance review, etc. Now, this is important. At the face of it, it looks that it's not a good thing because somebody may say institutions would exploit, etc. But if you are a good institution, and a good institution is more than half the strength comes from teachers. Okay? The faculty is key for delivering quality education, no matter what your infrastructure is. It's easy to build. Good students and good faculty are the two key components. Now, currently, again, the scales are flat. You can move from X to Y. The scale is the same. It's only prestige and certain other extra opportunities given by something. But now, good institutions would want to attract good teachers. And if they cannot do just a flat salary. You have to have an opportunity cost built by it. And let's see, in this setup, the talented teachers, the committed ones, will have a lot to choose. And I think the institutions better pay the talented ones better. You can't between a good performer and an average performer. Why is the pay the same? Why should it be? So there is going to be, though there is not explicit, there is a certain indication that the institutions will evolve. And please bear in mind, institutions will do a lot of groundwork. It will know what is the base value and what is a base plus and a base plus plus. As someone who has recruited senior people over the last 5 years, the expectations are basically changing these days. People know what is their worth, and they really ask for what they think they should be paying, which is normally not just what you get as a scale. There's always a scale plus in certain ways.
Very true.
Professor, Dr.
Yes,
Anand, can I just make a remark about the point you made about the quality?
yeah, please.
Yes. You see, there are 2 points I want to make. The first is that what is probably required is a formal working out of the rankings of colleges based on different criteria, and to some extent that is going on already, whether it is the NBA or NAC. But in the field of architecture, we do not have as yet the framework of NBA. But my experience is that there are a number of criteria which are used by the students and their parents. What is the rating of the college by the professional community is a very important question, because if the professional community of that city rates that college highly, and suppose the professionals for their own children's education they prefer that college, and therefore it is authenticating the quality of that college, therefore the others will flock there. So as it is, there is an informal system which is in place, but I agree with Dr. Watson that a formal arrangement can be made with criteria, suitable criteria to measure this ranking. But I would like to pose a different, related question to Dr. Srivatsan, and he very rightly said, finally it is the faculty and the students who are the engine for the school. It's due support, of course, from the authorities. An important thing I find is that unlike in the architectural profession, where you recruit a person based on the deliverables, in the academic field, the recruitment happens based on the qualification. And I find that tremendous difference between the way the recruitment happens in practice and the way the recruitment happens in academics. And I have always tried in a small way to see that the professional approach is brought into education as well. So I would like to ask Dr. Srivatsan, what are his views? Because that makes a lot of difference. If I just recruit based on the academic qualifications, there is no delivery happening. But this system has not changed. Can you please share your thoughts, sir?
Here's my answer, Krishna. It's I'm sure you know as well as I do, getting a really talented quality teacher
Yes.
is a very cherished, also equally a difficult task. How do we know who's fit, how's fit? Each institution has different methods, and the institution I come from has its own methods, where the qualification is only one of the criteria. It's not really an overbearing criteria in the choice. So we look for what does the faculty claim to be specialized in. We make a difference between what I'm interested and what I'm expert in. Interest everyone has. What is the, if you're saying that I'm an expert in something, what are the other criteria other than your education that you can demonstrate that you're good at? Either publication or projects and so on. So there is a substantial weightage given to what you show as a demonstration of your expertise. And there is an independent review of that, because some of the recruitments that I have done were asked for portfolios and papers, etc. And there is an independent audit of those things. So there is some kind of an assessment about what that work stands for, and so on and so forth. Somebody reads in, makes a comment, etc. All that are factored. And of course, references are given a lot of importance as to, and also eventually the face-to-face interview. So we need to have, just as we now admit students, we only don't look at marks. We sort of give a lot of importance to work experience. We give a lot of importance to portfolio. We give importance to interview, and so on. So, so there is there's multiple criteria with which we probably have to recruit faculty. But this is possible in some institutions. In some institutions, it's not possible. Sometimes for some institutions, there's no choice to say no. So all kinds of, I understand that there is a possibility. But if we make a bad choice, we are stuck with it. And the institution goes down with a bad appointment. So it's a very extremely careful and an important moment. Recruitment is an absolutely critical point in the institution's function.
Thank you very much.
That's good.
I fully endorse your view. Thank you.
Thank you. On the YouTube chats, we have some very interesting conversations, and how engineering colleges are far ahead of architecture on the blended learning and the flipped platforms. So, that's something that, there's some very interesting strings there. But we have Kashikar, who's on a roll, seems to be asking us, do you think with these kind of numbers, the undergrad side of the education, which is also something Jinu Kichli endorses or reiterates, do you think in undergraduate education it will become more standardized? And this whole thing of strengths and themes goes to the masters, or do you think bachelor's education can have multiple foci as well?
No, I think my view, I'm not surprised if it happens in PG. There's already scope for that. I think it will happen at the undergraduate level, not in terms of curriculum structure or something, but primarily the pedagogy, the way, the flexible learning, the modularity, the learning experience. You will have variations. Now there is a variation. It's not that now there is no variation, but they all appear flat from outside unless you get inside and actually investigate that. But these will become more and more evident and explicit. You may have to state it. You'll have to bring it to the forefront, saying that this is my position, this is my pedagogic thing, this is my learning environment, and so on and so forth. And increasingly, you find parents and students do thorough homework of different institutions. It's not because there is choice, first of all. And two, people are able to move between places in order to secure a good education. Now, NEP is driving you to do that. NEP is saying, now you have no excuse. You cannot say, I am belonging to this university, I'm following its curriculum. So, in a sense, you're putting up your hand and saying, see, I don't know what, there's nothing much more I could do. But that's gone. So you have to own up your curriculum. You have to own up your pedagogic structure. You have to own up your learning environment. So both undergraduate and postgraduate, this will be there, and I think it's a good thing.
Fantastic. That's very well answered. In fact, I must encourage all the higher education institutions to read the policy, because out of the 66 or pages, there are only 30 or lesser than that deal with higher education. And it's very well spelled out. The spirit of what Dr. Srivatsan is saying is, in fact, inherent in the policy itself. And, institutions can take it up. We're kind of running out of questions. There are some lovely suggestions coming in, of course, on the chat. But not taking our time, could I bring you back to my the romantic thought, Dr. Anantakrishna or Srivatsan? In a place like Bangalore or Chennai or Mumbai, and we have those clusters, we're talking more than a dozen colleges within a few square kilometers. And we're talking hundreds of square kilometers from where students have to travel and come and probably not return back. The NEP does clearly want to be more inclusive. And inclusive, I really, like I said, I mean intake as well as whom you are serving. Is there any chance? How can we think about this? Or do you think it's just the way the market plays? Or
No, there is. See, if you read the prospective plan, I'm sure you have done that, which takes cognizance of this and says, state 1, state 2, state 3, and in certain states you won't be allowed to raise. I think that I have a different view about it. So first of all, the education is not in not with the government anymore. Correct? Its bulk of it is in the private sector. Okay. Now, when a private sector runs an institution, will always look at access to resources. Where do I get good teachers from? Where do I get practitioners from? Whether the practitioners will be able to travel to my college, etc. What is the environment in which I'm teaching the college? For example, if my college is going to be something like a baker kind of school is what I'm trying to do, then I would be closer to that kind of a practice and environment, or whether I can access, etc. And second, there's a reason why there are heavy clusters around metropolitan cities, because it's in terms of catchment population, okay, and also push factors as much as it's pull factors. For example, why most of the students from Kerala are studying in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu? It's because of a certain kind of a policy orientation within the state. So there are a whole range of factors that is operating to it. But I think we have learned our lessons that we cannot move the location of the institution by hand, by saying, you be here, you can only offer incentives and encouragement. Okay, for example, you can offer incentive for setting up an industrial unit in a backward area, industrially backward area, something like that. But I don't think institutions operate in that fashion. So it's a very difficult thing to do. I completely understand why there are not certain institutions in certain areas. I'm hoping, I don't know, maybe sometimes you're increasingly seeing architects settle down in smaller towns, much more than what it was about 15 years ago. And today, some of the best works are not only coming from metropolitan cities. Some of the best works, for example, the architects in Thrissur or Belgavi, some other place who produce some absolutely fascinating work. Who, on the long run, these would be centers of good practices. And institutions will come closer to these centers of good practices because you will not only get support, you will have patrons who would value this education. Currently, it's more identified with the metropolitan thing, and also the infrastructure is easily available in the metropolitan, but it will take some time. But we cannot push because it will not survive. Because if you were to run a college in Nagapattinam, the person who runs would know what is the real difficulty in running that institution. Access to teaching material, mobilizing resources, etc. So it's something that we need to be a little more patient about. As architects settle in different places and accessibility increases tremendously these days, and deliveries are both online and offline, mobility is better, then you'll have a lot more different distribution of institutions. But currently, in the foreseeable future, this is how it's going to be.
Professor Anand. Professor Anand?
Sorry, I was muted. Please, Professor Krishna.
I would like to just add a few points to what Dr. Watson has said.
Please.
When it comes to the clustering of institutions in metropolitan cities, an important point I have to state is about the intent of the people who run these institutions. In the private sector, what I have found is that it is the return on investment that is what is driving the investors to start these architectural institutions. So they look at the expenditure and income, and they will look at the supply and demand, and they will modulate their response to that. For example, in the COVID situation, there has been a drastic downsizing of the faculty all over the place. And there have been, just like in the other sectors, there has been salary cuts imposed on teachers. So the point is, it is what is the economic factor that drives these people who run this institution. So that has to be factored as a reality when it comes to the decision making about the architectural institutions they're setting up and they're running is a major factor. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good responses there. There are also questions about how is the education scenario in India evolving overall, because with so much focus or dependence on private universities, and them, as Professor Krishna kind of pointing out, having different priorities or different intentions. And if one looks at some of the oldest universities in the world, they are based on fundamentally different principles and on different foundations. So the endowments or the chairs that are instituted are going to be there and adapt to situations. While something as simple as a small, it's not small as yet, but a 3 month disturbance can really toss our finances into disarray. But I think that calls for a separate discussion on American model and the European model. The Indian model, I think, is still evolving. We'll keep our focus to this. I would like to call back Dr. Jayashree Deshpande, Dr. Rama Subramaniam. We've run out of the audience questions. So, do you think we close this session? How would you opine?
Yes, I think it is time we can wind up. Jayashree ma'am. Yes, yes, sure. Rama ma'am, I request you to please. Okay, sure. It's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks at the close of this illuminating session. And I wish to express gratitude to our esteemed President Habibji for providing support and encouragement to conduct this webinar. And I must uh, acknowledge with gratitude the presence of the Director of NAC, Dr. S.C. Sharma, who came on board to simplify certain issues and explain it to the larger audience and sharing his thoughts. We are all inspired by your words, sir. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation to Professor Srivatsan for sparing his time and sharing his thoughts on this important development in academic direction and the change that we all foresee. And we are enthused by the ideas of architect on the actions to be taken and the way forward and the various options that he has presented. We are grateful to the thoughts expressed by Sri Dr. Anant Krishna, who has a wide experience and he has brought his thoughts to us. And I also extend my thanks to the Office of COA and COA TRC and Jayashree Madam for all the back end support. And thanks to my own faculty, Sandhya and Sharad, for helping us to set up and other things. A big thanks to everyone. It was very illuminating, and I hope to take the discussion forward at some other time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for the welcome.
Thank you, Rama ma'am. And I would like to place on record a thank you from the Council of Architecture and CRC to you and your institution, the Sagar College of Architecture, for having put together this wonderful program and coordinated it together with all the I would all the
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you so much for the speakers and the panel.
And it's a pleasure and privilege. And I'd just like to encourage that to work harder and probably in a timely fashion now. So in the next few months, we should rally all our professionals and academicians together. And if we can help the council, I think we got a stronger path forward. Yeah. So my support on this.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you and good evening.
Thank you. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.